Hello, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. I am so grateful to be back from not one, but two hurricanes in our area and cannot tell you how amazed I am at the fact that I'm just able to be here with you. So grateful. The eye of the storm was right on my street. Talk about conflict, talk about storms. Oh my gosh, we went through it down here in the South. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all your concern, your love, your support during, before, after each of these storms. So you've been at work too, just trying to support and love. Some of you have been through it. My prayers continue to be with you. Today, we're talking about how to find harmony together in relationship with one of my dearest friends, Kristi Rowles. She is an Enneagram 6. You may know her from the Enneagram University. Sometimes we have students actually that will tell us, I've been in, her program or mine. And what's so beautiful about that is Kristi and I, as you'll begin to hear our story today, we met each other years ago when we were early on in our Enneagram journeys, and we just built each other up. This is a meeting of the minds today. We are giving you the best we have for your conflicts, for your strategizing. And I'm thinking about Kristi too, because she is my fellow girl of the South, even though she travels all over the world and always make sure to plan well. But it was just a shock for both of us to have to walk through hurricane stuff. So I'm really glad we got to record this episode for you and also tell you about her wonderful program, the Enneagram University. She has an amazing deal going on right now for you. And the cart is open. If you're just somebody who's like, hey, maybe I've already done E&M coaching certification, but I want to do general certification, or if you're just somebody who's like, I don't know that I want to work with couples. You know how I put mine out sometimes for couples. But this one is for everybody. So whether you need to just dive deeper into Enneagram and you want to, or if you're just thinking, I want to become a coach and I want a really fun group to do this with, she is, as I said, a 6, but she is a 6 who is good at what most 6s are great at, which is connecting and group and just really loving community. So I'm so glad to share that with you. It's in the show notes. And we're going to talk to Kristi in a moment, but I just wanted to once again say thank you so much. We are here today to focus on you and your conflicts in your marriage and in your relationships. So we're going to talk about scaling, one of the concepts I love that she goes through. And as I said, what to do when your instincts are off, when your ideas are off, when you're just feeling off. And I just love that we can truly dig deep. Also, for those who are 6 or have that counterphobic 6, we really dig into that too, because that's a type we don't often get to talk to a lot about on the podcast. So stick around for that too, because Kristi is that type and she's going to share that with us. So anywho, so glad to have you. Thank you for pressing play and just being here with us. And let's talk to Kristi.
Kristi, thank you. It's been so fun catching up with you before we got on. We're so happy to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. Thank you, friend.
Thank you for having me. Anyone who doesn't know, Krista and I are friends in real life. And we were just saying how life is so crazy that sometimes there's not always time to keep up in the way that we want. So
Yes.
we had a friend catch up before we're hopping on the podcast, and it's just good for the soul.
Exactly. And we were both in Florida at the time of no one knowing Enneagram. And I believe we met over Enneagram and coffee. Is that where we met?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, we reached out to each other and we started having coffees and doing some team projects and thinking about presenting and then different presentations and brainstorms. And gosh, it's
Yeah.
just so awesome to get to chat with you again today. Look how far you've come with Enneagram University. That's
Mhm.
amazing.
Thank you, friend. Yeah, I mean, we started out baby dreaming together, having our own companies, coaching businesses, and then to watch them both evolve over the last few years has been so special. So, yeah, I'm a fangirl for life, and I'm grateful to be here today.
Me too, with you, girl. And I'm so happy. And we'll talk all about you in a little while. But I would love for our audience to hear about you more, a little bit as a person. You are a sexual 6 also on the Enneagram. And I feel like
hmm
that's sort of been a bit of a blind spot on this podcast that we'd love to explore a little bit today, if that's okay with you. Just telling us about
Yeah.
yourself and how that looks for you and for most self-pres 6s.
Totally. Yes. Okay. So a little bit about me in general. So you and when I heard you speak at the summit, the Enneagram and Coffee Summit, I was like, wait, where is she? And then you're literally in my same town. I was like, what? So we found each other that way, and we just kind of like built a beautiful friendship. But all that to say, I'm born and raised in Florida. I lived in the Midwest for 7 years for college and grad school. I have my master's in therapy, which is another passion that you and I both love and have. And then I transitioned, and then I transitioned to a coaching company, and have just built a beautiful space in the universe that I feel so honored and grateful to be a part of. And then eventually launched Enneagram University, where we train and certify Enneagram coaches. So it's a beautiful, like, it's been a beautiful experience and so special. And now, though, I love to travel. So I am living in Ecuador currently. I didn't plan to stay here. Did I not tell you that,
No,
Krista?
I just
Oh,
love that. I've seen you all over the world, literally. So I can't say I'm totally surprised, but a little
yeah.
bit.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I went to Guatemala for a couple of months and absolutely loved it. And then later that year, I traveled to India, absolutely loved that. And I just thought, like, this is my home. Like, I feel most of myself when I'm traveling, even if I'm doing it solo, like as single woman, right? It's like, I just feel so at home in my skin when I'm exploring. And so right now I'm in Ecuador, which is very interesting to talk about, like being a type 6 and traveling the world solo and doing a lot of different things. Like there's a lot there that comes up. But yeah, I lead with type 6 for sure. I am dominant in the sexual instinct, which sometimes folks who are listening, you might know the language like counterphobic. So that is us, those of us who are dominant in the sexual instinct. And I will say, like a lot of us, when you first find your type, you're like, ugh, woof, kind of wish it wasn't me. I have learned over the years to deeply love and appreciate being a type 6, despite its challenges, right? We all have challenges. We all have shadow sides that we don't love, that aren't super fun, but learning to like befriend those parts of yourself is so special. And there is so much to be said about like coming to terms with what your lens is in the world. And then rather than trying to like run from it or shame those parts of yourself that you don't love, like how do we lean in and befriend them and start to navigate life using them as a support and a strength, and compassionately as well. So there's a lot we could talk about being 6s, but that's just a general overview of like
That's a good
who I am,
start.
what I'm doing in the world right now, where I am, and what I love.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it gives us a sense of A, we're just happy for you, but B, the reminder that when we come to that shadow of our personality, it doesn't mean we have to toss all the good out with it. And I
Yes.
really appreciate you saying that, because I do believe there's a lot of giftedness in each of us. And so for you to just claim your six-ishness in a positive way also really is redemptive and
Yeah.
glorious. And so I'm
Yeah.
glad you're able to do that. And I know people have seen it written as SX6 or CP6. Again, same thing. When people are trying to figure out if they're a counterphobic 6, what's something you might help them to distinguish?
Yeah.
This is sort of different from the regular phobic 6.
Yeah, great question. So the way that the language I kind of use for the self-preservation 6 and the counterphobic 6, and so yeah, the language is a little tricky, right? So we have our talking about instincts, we have our self-preservation, which is our phobic 6s. We have a social, which doesn't necessarily have a nickname, and then we have those of us who are dominant in sexual instinct, which are called counterphobics. So the part of the reason that 6s have that language, unlike the other types, the phobic and counterphobic, is because we can flip pretty quickly depending on how the room is reading, or if something gets kind of like tweaked with our level of trust or the leader in charge or whatever. And so sometimes the language I use to kind of identify those different parts are one, the self-preservation or the phobic 6s tend to get small. When a threat comes, they tend to kind of withdraw, go internal. They kind of run away from the threat. And it's like, let me just be compliant. Like if you have been around the Enneagram for a while, you know that the word compliant is often used with 6s, and we can be. That we're really talking about the self-preservation or the counter or the phobic 6s when we talk about being compliant, falling in line, doing what you're supposed to do, like kind of flying below the radar, not really ruffling feathers.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we have our counterphobic 6s that are dominant in the sexual instinct, and we actually tend to look behaviorally on the outside a lot like 8s. The
Mm.
difference, though, especially for folks who are not sure if they're 6 or 8, is do you have that same level of anxiety, the skepticism, the self-doubt, the fear under the surface? We are still driven by the same motivations, but when we experience a threat as a counterphobic 6, our tendency is to run towards it. And what we're really
Mhm.
doing is trying to convince ourselves that we're not scared. It's very subconscious, right? It's like, I'm not scared. Watch how like big I get, right? So I talked about the
Yeah.
phobic sixes getting small and going internal. Counterphobic sixes tend to like get big and bulk up like the Hulk, it's like, I'm not scared of you, but actually
Yeah.
we are. We're just scared of being scared. So we're trying to convince ourselves that
Yes.
it's not so scary and we can actually survive. So that's a little bit of a picture
Yeah. Yeah.
of the phobic and the counterphobic sixes. And so, yeah, I usually tell people like if you're torn between a 6 and an 8, eights rarely confuse themselves for sixes, but counterphobic
Mhm.
sixes definitely can confuse themselves for eights. And also that's such a great reminder of why we don't type people. Because initially, when I was first finding my type, I had very close people in my life say like you're totally an 8, and
Mhm.
then that created a little bit of confusion because I'm like that sounds nice actually. Like, can be that
Mhm.
like intense, but not have the like regret. Oh no, did I upset them? Should I have said that? Like ruminating kind of feelings, which I absolutely have under the surface.
Yeah.
So that's that. I mean, we're all complex people, but that's a little bit boiled down of the phobic and the counterphobic.
That's so helpful. You did such a beautiful job with that. And I honestly think we can hear your head type flex here as well. And I love how you named that. I at least see the undergirth of the counterphobic 6 being really winsome and endearing, even with all of the intensity, because like you said, there is still going to be some fear underneath. And so you might see it
Yeah.
for a little while, like necessarily pop out, like I'm going to protect myself and fight. But I also will have tender, soft moments, right? And I'm sure you've had to tell people
Mhm.
that, like, we're not always intense and raging.
Yeah. And really, the question is, do I feel safe here? Because
Mm.
most of the time, that even our defense mechanisms for any types, like our defense mechanisms come up when we don't feel safe or when we perceive a threat in some sort of way, whether that threat is the threat of being disappointed, the threat of being unloved, the threat of doing something wrong, whatever it is for all of our types. When we talk about our core fears and core motivations, we all perceive threats. And so that ego structure comes up. Our Enneagram type is our ego structure, comes up to self protect. So can we be mindful of that and then aware, right? And that's so helpful for me because for a long time I was like, I'm just mad, like I'm
Yeah.
ticked off, whatever. When in reality, I'm like, actually, I'm really scared or like I'm really
Yeah.
sad. And so
Yeah.
being able to pause for a second with safe people, a
Mhm.
therapist, a safe friend, a partner, whoever creates that safety in your life, and have a
Mm.
moment to really like take a few deep breaths and connect to what's authentically happening. Most of the time for counterphobic sixes, we're not actually mad. Sometimes we totally are, and right, because we're high justice types in the sense of like
Yes.
we want fairness and safety for everyone in the world. So we got a little
Mhm.
activist in our blood sometimes, but yeah, for the most part, it really is self protection.
Yes, and protection, as you just named, for your people being a 6. One of our favorite things about our sixes is just the way they love and care for their people so well in their community. So
Yeah, we
I
do
love.
love our people. They're everything.
Yes.
They
My
are.
husband had a surgery after a bicycle accident this Monday, and one of my 6 friends has been the most tenacious with follow up, just checking in every day and just, is the surgery over? How's he doing? All these things. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, 6s have such a deep love for their people. And it just makes us
Yeah.
listening who are not 6s also want to be a loyal friend to our 6s. So thank you
Mm.
for just displaying that and explaining it to us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for saying that. It's funny, right? We always talk about the two sometimes in a not so super healthy place, like giving to get, but we all give to get in some ways, right? To help get our needs met. And that's not inherently bad or wrong. But one of the ways sixes, it's like, we do have a deep love for our people in the same way that twos do. But I think there is also this mindset of like a really deep value and appreciation for the value of loyalty and for friendship and care for other people. And so, yeah, that mutual exchange, like that is the best gift for us to get in return from people who love us, to have that intentionality and that care, because it is so important to us to give and also so meaningful when we receive it.
Well, that's such a good challenge for those of us who might be quick not naming any names, Krista, 7 who are like, oh, like we're in happy land now. We forgot about that. And so it's like,
Totally.
no, go back and love and
Yeah.
heal the deep feels. And so I think that one thing you chatted about just now too, I want to go back to is that as we head into the topic today of another topic about marriage and coupling, and therapy, I think
Mhm.
again, we see your flex of therapeutic skills here. And I know that you and I have talked about how we wanted and want when we need mental health care or coaching, we want really good people. And you and I have had fantasies together about like therapist in the box, perfect
Yes.
therapist. And watching you at the Ennea Summit, I was like, you named it so well of how each of us shows up. So, guys, I'm just claiming it. Kristi is an amazing therapist. You are. But I just want to say that if you missed her at the summit, you do such a beautiful job of talking about what each of us are like in therapy.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're so different, right? Like we all have these core motivations, the things we long for most, the things that freak us out the most. And
Mhm.
having a therapist who sees you in that way, that aligns with that, who can meet you in that place, what you're looking for, right? Like when I think about if we zoom out and talk about stances, I mean, an assertive type coming into session does not want the same thing as a withdrawn type that's very past oriented, whereas the
Mhm.
assertive types are very future oriented. So
Yeah.
what do we need? Do we need practical solutions? Do we need to sit in our feelings because we're really out of touch with our heart center, right? Like me as a head type,
Yeah.
I've got that counterphobic energy. So my head is first, my body is next, and then my heart. So I stay in therapy specifically to stay connected to my heart because I can just go and
Mhm.
strategize and think and plan,
Yeah.
but never slow down long enough to really sit with myself and the truth of like what's in my gut and my soul that I need or that I'm craving or that I'm sad about, right? So it's like it's not always super fun, but it keeps me
Mhm.
healthy. So yeah, just being mindful of what do you need in a therapist and what do you want most out of sessions? And sometimes, right, like years ago, I was seeing a therapist, and as a type 6, we love guidance, right? And
Yeah.
there's this inherent belief that I don't know what's good for me or what's right for me.
Mhm.
So I remember saying to my therapist, so like what do I do though?
Yeah.
Right? Like here's
Mhm.
all this, what do I do? And thankfully she was so brilliant. She's a type 1 and obviously has done so much work in her own life around self-compassion and sitting with the
Mhm.
discomfort and all of that. And she's like, I think we just sit here for a while. And at first,
Mhm.
my head part was like, no,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
one, so unpleasant. Two, like you're telling me that I'm stuck here, which freaks out my 7 wing for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
And like also I'm asking you for advice. But her
Mhm.
wisdom of knowing that my actual work was learning
Mhm.
to trust myself and
Mhm.
tolerate more distress or anxiety. Like that's what I needed. So there
Yeah.
is a dance a little bit of like trusting your clinician,
Mhm.
but and kind of letting them lead, but also knowing what you need most and what
Mhm.
tends to work and not work for you. Like that's just so
Mm.
relevant.
Yes. And before you had this very nuanced Enneagram details that you've developed over the last, almost decade, I feel like that's what we were touching on in our old conversations is you knew you needed that and you were tenaciously
Mhm.
trying to find that. And that's the kind of detail you provide in Enneagram University, which we'll talk about in a little while, but just even here with us as we go into our marriage tips in a sec. But I love that you named that it's important. So if you're out there in therapy and it's not a fit for you, of course, try to see if you can chat with your person about that. If that feels too big and scary for you because you're like, I'm already here because I need help, I can't change
Yeah.
them. It's okay to find somebody else who does get it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I wouldn't mind that at all if I'm working with somebody and they're like, you're not the right fit. I've had that
Yeah.
happen before, and that's
Same.
okay. I just want the right fit for them. So I also love how you just honored people when you said, it's not like you were making fun of, like, this is how they show up in therapy. You, in fact, used it for strategy. Like,
Yeah.
a 7 in therapy is going to want to talk a lot, and then they're going to want some very light tips. And that's what I did with the 7 yesterday. And I
Mhm.
knew if I bounce so deep, like I've had done, it's terribly unpleasant and it's too much all at once. And coming to
Yeah.
learn with you that we also want to know what people are like, but then honor them. It's just, of
Yeah.
course, it seems like so easy once we say it now, but I feel like a lot of the time people are trained in therapy to just push people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And also, I mean, it's a dance, right? Because as mental health professionals, we do have a responsibility to figure out what works for us and to have a flow, right? We're not just, I mean, yes, our role is in some ways to be fully present for the client and kind of remove ourselves from the room ish. But to the same point, like we have a responsibility to be our authentic selves so that we can create a genuine connection with our clients. And so sometimes a client, we're not a and sometimes the client isn't a fit for us, and doing our due diligence in the beginning to say like what's important to you, like even in a first session, if you're meeting with a new therapist or if you are the therapist listening, and you have a new client, really saying what feels most helpful, or what do you find that you need most in life, like what makes you annoyed, like if someone's for example, you're sharing a story and then they share one and it's like, well, wait a second, but can we talk about me? Right? Like that's helpful information. Or you know that you hate being told advice, or maybe
Mhm.
I need advice. Like that is so helpful. And so I know if anyone listening has been in the mental health space for a while, sometimes we talk about it like when you go to a medical doctor, you don't always love the first doctor you meet, and that's all good. Like there's no shade, no hard feelings. You just move until you find one that you really like. And it's the same with a therapist. And there's
Mm.
nothing wrong with that. It's actually a beautiful process to honor yourself as the client and as the clinician,
Yeah.
like regardless of what role you're playing.
Oh my gosh, so well said. And even with different seasons, like maybe they helped for a little while. But yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that we're trying to honor each other in Enneagram spaces. It just makes a difference when we know these nuances versus just like they're not a fit. Instead, just like, ooh, I think this kind of person would be a fit. It just helps us to
Yeah.
narrow it down. So when we do have our and I really did, by the way, just preface that for all of you to see, like Kristi is the real deal and she does go so deep and so nuanced. So now that we approach the couples tips,
Yeah.
that you give so many clients all these years, I guess I wanted to ask the big picture question first before we get a little bit deeper. And that is, when you see couples finally start to be vulnerable, tell one another about their communication problem, like I'm upset with you, you hurt my feelings, I have some work to do with you. What can we do when we pretty much just got that virtue of courage up and then our mate feels injured and we're now apart? What do you
Yeah.
help couples to start with? Because we know everyone here in listening and us too, that's a hard part of marriage and relationships is you do try to share what you want to share, and then there's all of a sudden conflict, and then there's a disconnect.
Totally. Yeah, and I just first even want to normalize that process, because when we are having really vulnerable, painful conversations, or when we're saying, "Hey, this part of you really hurt me," or "What you said or did hurt me," that one, that's vulnerable to say, and it's also vulnerable to be told, especially when there's especially when there's so much love between the both of you. Like there's never an intention to hurt the other person. And sometimes it's like, "Oh my gosh," it's our temptation sometimes to be like, "Well, that's not what I meant," or "You took it wrong." And I think there's always room for us to both talk about like, what can we own in this, right? Like maybe I am a little extra sensitive and I can own that, but also your tone was a little louder and more intense. And so you can own that. So looking at it from that lens of like this, instead of you're the problem, it's the two of us have this dynamic, and that dynamic isn't working for either of us. So how do we kind of, and I know this is like a very head type thing to say, but like, how do we problem solve that dynamic rather than pointing the finger or trying to identify who's wrong? We all have parts to own in a tough conversation or a tough dynamic. It is rarely appropriate for like one person to own it all, right? Like, and
Yeah.
we're just wounded people.
Mhm.
So if I
Yeah.
say you hurt me and that's like the last thing you would want to do because you love me,
Yeah.
you have two options. You either get defensive and say, "Well, that's not what I meant," or "You're too sensitive," or whatever, or you say, "Oh my gosh, I would never want to do that. Tell me more about what upset you so that I can learn what affects you or triggers you in some sort of way." And so that takes a different level of safety in the relationship, a different level
Mhm.
of commitment in the relationship, and a really like underlying belief that the other person is for you. Like,
Mm.
I'm not coming against you. I'm not intending to attack you.
Yeah.
And if it feels like an attack, then what am I saying or doing that makes it feel that way? I can work on the way in which I communicate, my body language, my tone, the intensity, the words that I choose, and also there's this thing that I brought up that also needs to be discussed. So it's just a very tender experience to have conflict with a
Mhm.
partner for sure.
Thank you for just normalizing that for all of us. Just so many people are just out there producing, I think, perhaps well-intentioned, but just almost fantasy language, like you're going to never have conflict again. And I think it's so important on this podcast, we try to be very real, that as much joy and refreshment as we can bring and become oasis and sanctuary for each other, there's always going to be processes and conflicts. And you just made it a little safer to people to even know how to start because you're reminding them, A, of parts language, which we talk a lot about with IFS on this podcast, but B, you're reminding them of being able to do a bit of their own processing before they approach. I
Yeah.
love that you said, because it's so old hat to be like I versus you, and you're just inviting the we space, which I love here.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I do it perfectly myself, but I try
Same.
really hard to prep myself first. And then also to, like you're saying, come in with some we language so that you're saying a part of me feels like we may be off right now. And here's why I think a
Mhm.
part of that is happening. And that's just so different. It's a sideways coming in, not in a manipulative way, but
Mhm.
it's direct, but it's not coming in with a punch. So thank you for
Yeah.
explaining that and giving people permission to invite we language in as a beginning.
Yeah, totally. I think that that really sets a stage. And I heard someone years ago talk about how they set an intention before a conflictual conversation, or
Mm,
maybe we kind of had a rub earlier and there was some tension, and we know that like I was a little snarky, you were a little snarky, like something is off, and we need to kind of talk about that. And so a lot of times, even like when my mom and I are having a hard conversation sometimes, or a friend of mine and I are having a hard conversation, or my ex-husband and I were having a hard conversation, it was like, okay, let's lay the foundation and say, here is my intention, what I hope to accomplish in this conversation. And
mhm,
that alone, like it sets a stage of like, okay, what I really want is for us to reconnect. What I really
mhm,
want is for us to understand each other's perspective. What I really want is to find some supportive strategies so we can move forward and hopefully help this not happen again. And so, yes, to some degree, John, I know that you love John and Julie Gottman. They're like foundational marriage researchers in the world. They're phenomenal. And one of the things they say is for a lot of couples, what you disagree on or the conflict that you have now is the same things you're going to be arguing about when you're like 80. But the
mhm,
way in which you have those conversations, the way in which you approach them, the way in which you respond to them, hopefully matures, right? But
mhm,
when we talk about our Enneagram types, if I'm a type 6 and my ex is a type 9, it's like, okay,
mhm,
those dynamics of like the push and pull of me having big feelings, him often not knowing his feelings, like
mhm,
that was a repetitive conversation for many, many years. And that isn't
mhm,
inherently a problem. But the way in which
mhm.
you're like, oh yeah, that's happening again, like silly
Yeah,
ass look, it's happening again.
yeah, yeah.
And then it just becomes like not, pointing the finger and more just, again,
Mhm,
like that we approach. How do we tackle this dynamic,
mhm.
honoring each other and also trying to move us forward?
Yeah, you're really allowing people to narrate. This is the meta narrative I see about the cycles we get in. And if we can see little bits of progress here and there and see that we're
Mhm.
both accepting that this is the pattern we find ourselves in with our personality types, that can diffuse some of the animosity right there. And you also, we didn't go back to it, but you said, the heuristic of the quick, I'm the hero, you're the villain. That's something you can be addressing also before you even engage the conversation. Am I in a good headspace? Do I have a good relational window of tolerance? Have I given
Yeah.
grace to both of us and our types and the ways that we developed? And then that does require a lot. So it's kind of making that choice. Is this the issue that needs to be resolved? Can I do any of this internally? And now we're at the point where yes, we've decided it's worth it. This needs to happen.
Mhm.
It's a cycle. But as you said, even then, sometimes we just need to have mitigated expectations that we're going to land exactly on the same page. So I also love that
Yeah.
you named that it's even okay sometimes to have to come into a space of diplomacy. Um, and you also do something called scaling, which I find very interesting. Can you tell us about that
Yeah.
for another technique?
Yes, I love the idea of scaling. And I will just say, like, it does require both partners to be very transparent and answer very honestly.
Mm,
Otherwise, it could totally be used in a manipulative way, in a controlling way, in a way that would just be sabotaging to like a relationship.
yeah.
So, but scaling is it's an objective way to make decisions together. So, for example, let's say that my partner and I were, debating on what we wanted to do over the holidays, for example. And
Mhm.
so say that like I'm just going to make up names, but like Anthony's like, okay, I miss my dad and I think it would disappoint my Aunt Kim if we didn't go, but it'll also be so much easier if we just stay here for the holidays. So I'm going to give it like a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 is like I don't want to go at all, like that's a terrible idea. 10 is like we absolutely have to go, no questions asked. And so
Yeah.
where am I on that scale? So maybe Anthony's like I'm a 5. And
Mm,
so maybe Sam, his partner, says, well, I want to start new traditions with our own family. And we've been talking about that for a few years. So I'd really like to stay home. And to me, that's a 9 in importance. Well,
mm,
if someone's at a 5 and someone's at a 9, then just objectively, it's like, okay, well, then that decision is made. Like,
yeah.
that's great. And then you can
Yes.
problem solve, like, okay, my dad or my Aunt Kim are going to be disappointed. So how do we share this to them? But like, we're choosing what makes sense for us. So
Mhm.
that's a way to do that. It could also be something where like I really want to go out tonight and there's, my friends are having a barbecue and they invited our family and one partner really wants to go and the other one doesn't. And so scaling that, like I'm at a 2, I really, really just don't have the energy. I'm feeling discouraged and there's just a lot on my plate. Like I can't do it. And then, the partner's like, you know what, I'm at like a 4, like I don't really have to go either. So that's fine. So
Mm.
it's just like an
Mhm.
objective way to say, how important is this really? Now, obviously, and you and I talked about this and prep for this conversation. What happens if like a partner uses it dishonestly, right? As
Yes,
a
I
way
always
to,
yeah. It's
right?
all important to me.
That's important. And so, yeah, I mean, it does require some level of trust. So usually what I would say then, if you're like, is it really a 10 out of 10 for you? Right.
Yeah.
Because how many things are
Again.
really a 10 out of 10? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Um, so being able to say, okay, so tell me what's a 1 to you, right? Like kind of have each partner say,
Mm.
here's a 1. Like, I really don't want to do this thing. I really don't want to budge on this. Give me an example in the past when something's been number 1 to you. And then
Mm.
tell me when something's been a number 10 to you. So then instead of even saying like on a scale of 1 to 10, you could be like on a scale of going to a little kid's birthday party, which is you definitely don't want to do, all the way up to like take your dream travel trip to Greece. Where are
Yeah.
you? Right? Like on that scale, where are you?
Oh,
So then it's
oh
not just a
my
1 or a 10. It's like,
god.
let's use real life examples, identify a 1, identify a 10, and then there can be a little bit more, hopefully, honesty and like, yeah, um, at
Good.
least like a general mutual shared understanding of the scale.
Mm. Oh my gosh, that's so good. And I'm thinking even that Wes and I could use that sometimes too. It's one of my nine couple friends have loved this in their therapy sessions, but I haven't used it much in my work as a coach or therapist. And I feel like it would go so well with Wes being a logical type to just see that in a very black and white way with a number, because he'd be like, it makes sense to me, and I feel
Yeah.
like I would be the spouse caught into everything I want, I'm passionate about as a 7, especially if my 8 wings flaring that day. And so there's a sense, or my 6 being in a neurotic space that day, there's a sense of like you said, having to call me on that, like, Krista, how important is that to you?
Yeah.
Really? And that makes us accountable to showing love to others outside of ourselves, which I think as
Yeah.
spouses, we think we're really great at that, all of us. But I think that all of us have work to do around that. So I love that we can have some healthy lift off with that.
Yeah.
And it might even be like a small piece that we find like maybe they couldn't do the whole thing, but you make some progress with this, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you've probably seen couples do that kind of slow.
hmm Yeah, definitely. And I think it's different for every couple too, because sometimes it's like, say, say that we wanted to talk about a home project. Well, you want to put the money into renovating the kitchen, and you want to put the money into like nothing because you don't like to spend money on the house. You'd rather spend it on a fun trip, right?
Mhm.
And so now how do we negotiate those sort of things? So sometimes it's like, okay, we're both being honest. Here's what we want. How do we strategize or help both of our needs really like be heard? So sometimes it's digging beneath, like, is it really about the renovation of a kitchen, or
Mm.
is it actually about simplifying your life because you have kids to feed every night and like that the kitchen being in shambles is just not functional and it takes you a million hours longer and that is such a waste of your energy? Okay, that's different than like, I want to
So
blow
true.
money on a fancy new appliance, right? So let's talk
Yeah.
about what's really under the thing that you're looking for,
Mm.
and can we get that need met, right? So it's like, I don't want to spend any money. Okay, how do we then even negotiate that, like, well, this is really important to my partner, and so how do we kind of barter sometimes?
Yeah.
It's like, and no, negotiate this, or how do we say like, okay, I don't feel great about it, I don't want to spend any money, but what I'm actually concerned about is that we're going to spend it all now and then we won't have enough to pay our bills next month. So what about if we say, we don't do the renovation right now, but we do it in 6 months. And every month we set aside $1,000 or whatever, however much it's going to cost. And then we do it. So that supports the one partner who's like, I need a new kitchen. And it also supports the
Mm.
other partner's panic about not having enough money by
Mm.
saying, we're going to slowly get there.
Yeah.
Right. So like the
Mhm.
creative problem solving um, is, yeah, so helpful. It's like marriage saving at
Yeah.
times for sure.
Yeah, it really is. You're really thinking outside of the box with people. And that's one of the things I love about your work. Even the pushback you gave on just knowing that people might need help with the scaling and to have examples given to them that they can work with and just
Yeah.
allowing them to see, well, everything might not be a yes if we scale it even larger. So just being thoughtful about that, obviously working with Kristi too, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we do, you said something that really stirred up in me once again, the thought about instincts, because I thought about how deep those are. And you said it's often about that deeper underlying issue. So sometimes when we're having that deeper desire of social, of self-pres, of sexual, there might be roots that are clanking against each other. How do you sometimes help a couple when you see these instincts? Would it be similar that you would see which one has a bigger need?
Yeah, at times, and also knowing that things change, right? So, I mean, I definitely, while I'm dominant in the sexual instinct and like that connection is everything, when as an
Mm.
entrepreneur, I work for myself, like I'm in charge of finding money and making money and supporting my entire life. And I have a team. And so I have to pay them salary and all those things. And when money gets tight, I'm telling you, I will switch from that like confident, go get them counterphobic to like, oh my God, I feel like I can't breathe. And like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to like make salary next month or whatever the thing is. And
Yeah.
so just giving ourselves permission to evolve or to change and not be so boxed into our dominant instinct that we don't allow other
Mm.
things that come up to be so important. Like for example,
Wow.
if I just moved to a new place and I have no friends, and I'm just like desperate. My social battery is just so empty because I don't know anybody there.
Yeah.
I may make a decision where if I'm usually self-pres, it's fairly fixated on having enough money and paying for things and material things. I
Yeah.
might forego one of those priorities, that my traditional priorities or values, in order to spend my money on going out with friends because I've been here for 3 months and someone just invited me out and I will go to this fancy restaurant and I will spend more money than I would
Yeah.
traditionally because my social instinct is so dry right now. So just allowing yourself to be and be mindful of like, what is my circumstances in life right now and how are those affecting what I'm longing for? So
Mm.
just having a really open conversation about that and
Yeah.
always using the Enneagram to provide us language for what it's like to be us, but not
Mhm.
so rigidly that we're bound to say, oh, well, why do you even want to spend money on going out with friends? Because you're not even a social instinct, right?
Right.
Like
Oh my
it's
gosh.
it's
That's
not that rigid.
well, and I think that our spouses occasionally might do that to us, but I think that our I was like, or our overly perceptive teenagers. but
That too.
but I actually think we do this to ourselves more sometimes, where I've heard
Mhm.
Esther Perel talk about the fact that we can, of course, in earlier relationship dynamics be more developing together, but then in later we need to be more expansive together. And so you're actually giving couples permission to say, yes, I know your spouse is this instinct and you're this, but would it be helpful to allow yourself to have some expansiveness here, considering you're new in
Yeah.
town and that, you could be a bit rigid sometimes with self-pres, but that knowing that this would be good anyway, practice for you, that this would be a good moment for you to flex something that you're not as used to in a comfortable way, in a baby step way, but
Mhm.
you're still doing it. So thank you for just making us see
Yeah.
that we can grow, because you're right. We don't want to get so locked into our instinct that we forget about the others.
Right. And sometimes there's an over dependency on those, right? Like I am so tightly wound around my material needs for survival as a self-pres
Yeah.
that I lack a social connection, a sense of
Yeah.
community in my life, or really
Mm.
intimate one-to-one bonds with friends or a partner or my kids or whoever. And so I think for all of us, when I teach and talk about the Enneagram, I talk a lot about being three centered. I'm not just in the triad that I'm not just a head type. It's
Mm.
very healthy for me to be very connected to my body and my gut, because sometimes I'm just like rationalizing, but if I would pause, my gut actually knows what I need anyway.
Mm.
Or there might be times where, I mentioned earlier, I stay in therapy to stay connected to my heart, because that
Yeah,
center
you
is
do.
not like, I'm just moving too fast and thinking too much sometimes to let my heart feels come up. So I have to like intentionally build
Yeah.
that into my life. But yeah, same with instincts. So just kind of creating balance of like, how much energy and focus am I giving to my material needs that are really truly dependent for my survival, my
Yeah.
social needs, which are also dependent for my survival and my sense of belonging and connection, and
Yeah.
also my sexual one-to-one instinct that is really connected to my deep bonds with individual other people.
That's so important. And I just invite everybody to get to know you better, because this is just gold. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Kristi. This is such a beautiful conversation. And I think some of our listeners are going to want to keep having it with you. So they
Mhm.
need to know the spaces for connection, because
Yeah.
you just are a connector. You are doing your heart work. I can feel your heart. And I'm so glad you're doing your work. But tell us how people can do their work with you. And this, even
Yeah.
interestingly, like we said with EU, includes not the European Union,
Yeah.
Enneagram University, how people can connect with you on maybe if they want to be a coach. We talk about Enneagram and
Yeah.
marriage coaching, but you coach for everybody, right?
I do. Yeah. So Enneagram University, we launched it in the fall of 2020. So we've been here around 4 years. We have an incredible team of professors. There are six of us. Half of us have our master's or a PhD in mental health therapy. So there's definitely that foundation of holistic human care and mental health diagnosis, and how that overlaps a lot with our Enneagram work, and how the layers of our identity affect even how our type shows up, right? Like not all twos are the same, not all threes are the same, for a variety of culture, like a bunch of different, I mean, birth order, we could go on.
Yeah.
So that is very much a part of how we teach. And then yeah, we are a great place for all sorts of people. So there's 3 levels to our program at Enneagram University, and you can absolutely just do level 1, which we call Enneagram Wisdom. It's like hardcore nitty gritty. So all my Enneagram nerds out there, like that
Yeah.
is for you. If
Yeah.
you're not sure if you ever want to use this in any sort of professional way, you can totally still do level 1 and have like the time of your life learning all the things. And then, yeah, we do certify coaches for one-on-one client work, for couples work like you do, and then also groups, teams, workshops, things like that. So we have coaches all over the world doing really incredible work in organizations and small businesses and various communities and in industries, healthcare, and even the trucking industry and the
Oh,
creative writing industry, and working at colleges. Like there's just so many avenues. And some people do it full time. Like we have our program is designed to help folks build a coaching business that is sustainable, that's profitable, that supports them doing the work that they feel really called to and that they love. And then also can not have to do it just as a side gig, right? It's like that's a beautiful thing. We have a lot of coaches who just do it as a side gig, and that's
yeah.
fun and passion project for them. We have a lot of coaches who are like, I'm so obsessed with this. I want to do it full time. And that's important for us to empower and give people the resources to make that happen, because it's just so sad to me if it's like this is what you love and you feel called to, and you don't have the resources yet to make that a reality. So that's what our real specialty is helping people monetize and become coaches if they want to do that. But we have a ton of therapists in our program. We have a ton of educators. We have a ton of HR managers, executive leaders, like supervisors, and who manage a team. So really, it truly is applicable for anybody. From I just like to nerd out over the Enneagram and I want to go deeper for that, all the way up to I want to build my own coaching practice and do this sustainably as a career.
Oh my gosh, I did not know all of those levels are part of this.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
amazing.
Oh, thank you, friend. Yeah, it's a fun place. And our community is just very diverse and vibrant and fun and
Mm,
brilliant. Like it's just our EU community. We have a Facebook community. We do coaches
mm,
calls, and
mm.
it's just like a bunch of people who love people and love the
Oh,
Enneagram.
oh.
And what's better than that, you know?
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh,
a
that's
sweet
the
place.
way Counterphobic 6 builds community beautifully
That's so
with
true.
intention. I love it.
That's
Oh,
true.
I'm so glad. So, those are the best ways people can grow. What are the best, and of course, it'll all be in the show notes as well, but what are the best ways they can connect with you? Would it be going to the website, the
Yeah.
Instagram?
Yeah, so our website is a great place. It's the enneagramuniversity.com. You can always find me and our team there. And if you are want to just like get a feel for the course, there's a free preview you can download, like no weird strings attached, but you can just check it out, see if it's for
Mhm.
you. You also could book a consult with me. I would love to. I mean, it's my favorite part of what I do, where you and I are both in this work because we love people. So
Yeah.
for anybody who wants to just see, like, does this make sense for me? You can book a free consult with me. And I
Mhm.
always promise, like, it's not a weird salesy, I'm going to hunt you down and beg you to buy. It's just like gross and not my vibe.
Yeah,
It's not a win
no,
for me if
exactly.
someone enrolls in Enneagram
That's why we
University
get
and it's
along
not a
so well.
fit. Exactly. It's like, let's find our people and like work with what makes sense and like, support people finding other options if that makes more sense for them. So yeah, you can find me on the website. You can also find us on Instagram, Enneagram University on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn. So you can find us in a bunch of places for sure. But that is primarily where you'll find all of my Enneagram work. So yeah, I would love to connect with anybody. And like Krista's people are my people. So hi, I'd love to be your friend to come introduce yourself and let's get to know
Yes.
each other.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. From my kids who love you to me to this whole community. We're just so thankful, Kristi, for this time, for your wisdom. So grateful you're sharing your beautiful wisdom in the world, and just keep
You're
up all the beautiful
generous.
work you're doing and resting.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to do. I told you before we hopped on, like I do a lot of podcasts for work, but like getting to do with people who I genuinely love and know in real life. And like, this is just the sweetest ever. So thank you for having me.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for spending time with us today. I am grateful for the tools and tips from Kristi. She really knows how to help her clients. As you heard her and I say, she's very picky. So I love that she chose to come with us on the pod today. And as she should be, because it's time is a commodity and you have to be really careful about how you spend that time. And I hope for those of you who want to dive in deeper to the Enneagram journey, that you would be picky about the therapists and helpers, just like we are, that you find, and that you would also make sure they're the right fit. And if you want to do that journey, everything of hers is in the show notes. I'm so thankful for you. Make sure you grab one thing from today that you're going to take with you and apply to your marriage or your family or to the Enneagram University world. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.